So this is, not exactly. It's an uncomfortable situation this Shabbat about what to speak about, because it was such a horrible week for our country on so many levels. So I'm going to put this all in context of Torah, and then end my words with a prayer, which I think is rabbinic. So before everyone freaks out, don't freak out. I mean, freak out about what's going on in the country, definitely, and what's going on in the world, definitely. But don't freak out about it. I'm not gonna break any rules here tonight. Maybe a couple of rules, but. So this is a great parsha this week. It's a great parsha on a number of levels. But one of the things when we look at the Torah, we're really looking at these weeks, the last few weeks and the coming few weeks, at the story of the first family of our people. And we're looking at stories and studying, if we really dig beneath what's called pshat, the simple meaning of each verse, we really get to identify some characteristics of our ancestors that we know, if we are honest with ourselves, exist within us. And one of these, believe it or not, characteristics is anxiety with a little neuroses. Who'd have thunk? If you remember last week, Jacob, with a lot of anxiety, runs away from home. His mom tells him to run away from home because Esau not so happy with the whole situation about the birthright. And at the end of the parsha, he basically runs away from his father-in-law's, Laban's home. There's a lot of running away from home. There's a lot of what comes around goes around. There's a lot of, karmic resolution in Jacob's life. A lot of things that he foresees in the first dream in last week's parsha happens in this week's parsha. He starts out this week's parsha with probably an even greater anxiety because, see, breaking up with Esau and the sort of destruction of their relationship, that was the easy part. And what I mean by that was Esau made it very clear that he was not happy about what happened with the birthright being stolen, that he was not happy with how Jacob and Rebekah manipulated Isaac into switching the blessings around. And since we know he's good with a bow and arrow, Jacob, not reluctantly, leaves home. That's the easy part, to run away. And so he has his first anxiety dream with the ladder, the sulam, the angels going up and down. But in the beginning of this week's portion, his anxiety is greater because he finds out that he is going to see Esau. So they both brothers hadn't seen each other in 20 years. It's a long time because remember, Jacob had to work 7 years for Rachel, but it wasn't Rachel, it was Leah, and then he worked another 7 years, and then he worked, another 6 years. Laban was kind of a manipulative kind of guy, and long story short, in this place called the Wadi of Jabbok, which if you've been to Israel with me or with Jason or with Rabbi Byrne, we can sort of point out as we're driving from up north down to Jerusalem, this Wadi where we believe this event took place. As Jacob enters the land, Esau hears that Jacob has acquired lots of cattle, lots of sheep. He's wealthy. He's got lots of people, a big family. And Jacob hears that Esau has 400 men with him. Now in the Torah, 400 men is a trigger for he has a military with him. He has an army with him. And so Jacob's anxiety gets even greater. Like, I thought he was going to kill me at the beginning of the last week's Torah portion. He's got 400 men. And Esau's probably got some anxiety too because Jacob's wealthy. He's got a lot of wealth, which means he's got God on his side too. And they're twin brothers. Now, in those days, the Midrash teaches us, in those days, there were no mirrors. People didn't have mirrors in the Bible. You had to be very, very, very wealthy to, it was highly polished glass to even have the kind of glass that you can make into a mirror. And so because they didn't have mirrors, that one of the things that happened when they first saw each other was they saw how much they had aged. Because they were twins. They were identical twins. They each saw how much they aged. And the Torah tells us as soon as they see each other, they break out in tears. They break out crying. They hug each other. They kiss each other. And these aren't crocodile tears. These are tears of, I can't believe 20 years went by of this relationship that was apparently irreconcilable, broken, irreparable, and I'm seeing how much older I am through seeing you, because they didn't have mirrors in those days, and I'm so saddened and so hurt and so pained by not just the amount of time that has passed with this irreconcilable relationship, but all of those anxieties that I felt for 20 years about you, each to the other. And so they cry and they hug and they reconcile. And there is salvation in that reconciliation. There is hope. And the rabbis even say, because some rabbis, as you know, were not great fans of Esau, the rabbis say it's from that moment, or should I say moments like that true reconciliation, heart to heart, 20-year-older brother to 20-year-older brother, twin to twin, that the world will be redeemed. It's that kind of relationship, that kind of reconciliation among human beings. So I want to read part of a drash written by Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson, who I've quoted many, many times, where he sort of intricately explains this reconciliation. All of this anxiety, all of last week's Parsha, all of the beginning part of this week's Parsha, one would think the brothers are going to kill each other, or one of them is going to die of a nervous breakdown, Jacob namely, because of the fear, the amount of fear that he has. And so here's what Rabbi Artson says. He says, religious thinkers throughout the ages have pondered the question, how do people have the audacity to stand in the presence of God? Finite in power, wisdom, and longevity, human beings are paltry and insignificant when compared to the supernovas and the galaxies of the universe. Finite in power, wisdom, and longevity, human beings don't see themselves in front of God, standing in front of God, who fashioned the universe and all those things that make us so paltry. How do we have the temerity, he says, to place ourselves before God, to address God, to argue with God, and then says that same question could be leveled toward the paradox of standing in the presence of another person, another human being. Each of us is a universe in and of ourselves, replete with our own depths and oddities and idiosyncratic behaviors. I have no idiosyncrasies, but thank you very much. And then says Rabbi Artson, the inexpressible death of one human soul exposed to the unfathomable profundity of another, the encounter of the unknown meeting ought to silence the universe. It's a marvel that we can reach each other at all. It is a paradox that the finite creatures, humanity, presume to call to God with hope. And then he goes to our week's Parsha and the story that I just summarized for you. And he says the following. Jacob, on his way back to the land of Israel from Haran, does create this reconnection with his brother Esau. And Jacob's words to Esau are very instructive even for us. He gives his brothers a bunch of gifts and says to his brother, to see your face is like seeing the face of God, and you have received me favorably. What a great comment. To see your face is as if I have seen the face of God, and you have received me favorably. Two things happen in that moment. Number one is Jacob does something that comes hard for all of us. He sees Tselem Elohim. He sees not only that his brother is created in the image of God, but that his twin brother has the capacity of God, just like each one of us are created in the spark of God. And second, it brings him comfort to know that he feels that acceptance. The opposite of acceptance, of course, is rejection. And this creates for us a full circle of the story of Cain and Abel. Cain kills Abel because of rejection that turns into rage and anger and hatred and death. But Jacob completes that story with his reconciliation with Esau because he not only sees God in his brother, but, and I should say, he is able to reconcile because he feels acceptance by his brother. So problematic, Rabbi Artson said, was Jacob's link of his brother and God, the generations of Jewish scholars backed away from this connection that he made. The rabbis were uncomfortable with saying Esau, who would become Rome, who would become the church, was a good guy in this story. This 1,000-year-old story that they had told that Esau was not the good guy was undone by Saadia Gaon, who we've talked about before in the 10th century, who says that Jacob makes one of the most profound and prominent statements in the Bible, that even his enemy, or so he thought, his enemy was also created in the image of God and had godlike characteristics. It's a shocking comparison, the rabbis say, and while they're uncomfortable with it, they also know the reality is that at the core of reconciliation is acceptance of the other. He says, as Rambam says, one brings gifts and sacrifices to worship God, and Jacob also brought gifts and offerings to placate his grieving sibling. Jacob knew what he did was wrong and didn't need to apologize for it. It was that look in his face that Esau saw and that godliness that he saw in Esau that brought them both to tears and to love. By approaching another person with reverence, Rabbi Artson says, and warmth, since encountering them is like seeing the face of God, by showing our openness to their concerns and their fears, presenting offerings before exchanging words, we affirm the unique marvel of each individual. And Rabbi Artson concludes, just as God asks not to be approached empty-handed, you have to approach God with a sacrifice, with an offering at least of your heart, so too human beings should be approached with offerings of respect, affection, and marvel. Each human being offers a unique embodiment of the godly and the mysterious. We, like Jacob, can make that comparison explicit by training ourselves to encounter God in everyone we meet. I don't need to say it. But if we take this message to heart, of reconciliation, of unifying, of coming together by seeing and knowing and living the experience that God exists in every person we encounter, including those who we don't agree with or we perceive are enemies, or even those who make us just downright uncomfortable with what it is that they believe, think, and feel. If we can truly see the godliness in them, if we can truly open our hearts to the possibility of wonder that Jacob and Esau experienced in their reconciliation, if we can train ourselves to encounter God in everyone we meet, then we have hope. We have hope of a future not only for ourselves and our community, but for our country. I've been saying this a lot these last few months. This isn't the first time. It's not the last time our country has been in crisis. And we do not have exemplars of appropriate behavior in our elected leaders on either side. These are not exemplars. These are not people to look up to for the most part. And their behavior, on the whole, is not something that I want my kids learning from. How to speak to other people, how to talk to others, how to respond to others, how to just do your best to mow down anyone who disagrees with you. It's wrong. It's wrong. And so our basic moral of this story this week is also our prayer. If they can't do it, then we must do it. And I think we get to the other side together as a community, as Americans, of this terrible impeachment era that we begin now. We get to the other side by training ourselves to encounter God in everyone we meet. And that sounds lofty and idealistic, and it may even sound naive to some. But I don't care. It's Jewish. If Jacob could do it and Esau could do it 3,500 years ago, so can we. Let's not live in fear of each other, we can live with fear, but not in it. And let us set the example for those who are supposed to lead us of what it means to live with humanity, what it means to have reverence for the other, not because they're right or wrong, but because they are also God's children. And may we, the prayer is, come to a place and a time and a day where brothers and sisters will hug and cry together because they learn how much more powerful it is to be united, and how common we are with each other, and how our hearts and our souls were created by God for the purpose of partnering with God in the perfection of our world and not its destruction.